Hello, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk About Palettes for the Very Beginner. Yay! Now, when you are a very beginner, I don't advise spending a lot of money on supplies. So let's start with a minimum, and let's talk about the palette. We've talked about the brushes in the other video. So now let me change cameras. It'll take just a second, and we'll go to work. All right, let's begin. You don't need this palette. By the time you add all the pigments, and you buy the palette, you're going to be overwhelmed. If you want a palette this size, that's fine. But for the very beginner, it's a little overwhelming. Plain sheet here. You don't need it. If you want it, that's fine. If you have one, that's fine. This palette. How overwhelming can a palette be? As a very beginner, it will make you nuts. So you don't need this one. Now let's talk about some recommendations. This is a travel palette. Plenty of wells for your pigment. These are the pigment wells. That's the mixing well. You want at least 6. See, this has a lot more than 6, but you want a minimum of 6 pigment wells. You've got ample mixing. This goes out. You've got some more mixing well. Close it up. Latch it together. You're ready to go. This is another travel palette. Lid, snap it on. It's got plenty of pigment wells, ample mixing well, but these smaller wells may not hold enough pigment to really paint with. Again, it's a travel palette. It's used when you're traveling or you're painting outdoors or you're watercolor sketching. Place for your brush. Snap on the lid, and away you go. This is going to be a recommendation. This is going to be a recommendation. Inexpensive, lightweight, plenty of space for your pigments, lots of mixing. Now, if you want it covered, Saran wrap will do it. Another suggestion, another little inexpensive palette. It's got 6 pigment wells. They're a good size. You can add pigments here, but there's not much mixing room, is there? How about just a white plate? That works just fine for mixing your pigments. My recommendations for the very beginner is this combination or this. Now let's talk about using our palette. When you begin to paint, you want to dampen your pigments so that it reconstitutes. When you get this, or any palette, it's going to be empty. You want to squirt your pigment in it. I'm going to show you. See how juicy that is? It's kind of like pudding. Kind of like pudding. I like to press mine down and get it flat. Now, the reason I like to do that is so that the contamination sits on top. And I like ample paint. Some will just do a little mountain and a little curlicue. Contamination is going to get all in here. That's not much paint. One concern about this versus this is wasting your pigment or your supplies. You are not wasting anything. This is not even a penny. Not even a penny. So I prefer, instead of a little dab, a larger amount, laying it flat so the contamination stays on top. Paint, paint, paint. After you have painted, this is going to be a mess where you've mixed your colors. This is going to be a mess where you've mixed all of your colors. And your pigment wells are going to be a mess. So when you're through painting, we're not going to clean the pigment wells. We're going to let them dry hard and then clean them. The mixing wells, we're going to clean. I use a paper towel. Or I use a dishcloth or an old bath cloth. Really doesn't matter. So we just finished painting. We've cleaned our mixing wells. Our pigment wells are a mess. Let them dry. If I try to clean them now, and this is contaminated, I'm going to mix in the contamination with our pure pigment and make a mess. When it's dry, I'm going to use my brush like a mop in the kitchen. Mop up the surface, rinse it out, my brush, mop it up again, rinse my brush. If you need to give it another swipe, do that. Now, as I have cleaned it, I brought water over in my brush into my pigment. That's going to begin to reconstitute it. Probably it will not be enough. Got a mister. I can mist them, add some water. I can also bring water over from my brush and drip to reconstitute it. And how much water do you need? You're going to learn as you go, depending on your palette, your brushes. For the very beginner, I'm going to suggest maybe a half a teaspoon. Maybe a half a teaspoon. So you'll start getting damp again, nice and juicy, spreading your palette. You're ready to go. This one's not quite damp yet, so see, I've got to press on it a little bit. But as that water reconstitutes it, it's ready to go. All right, we have our palette, we have our pigments, we have our working space. We know that when we get our palette, it will be empty. We will place our pigments in the pigment well, and we're going to talk about those in a different video. Place our pigments, let them dry. Let them dry. Then we will begin to paint. We will reconstitute our pigments with a mister or our brushes or a kitchen spoon or whatever works for you to start reconstituting your paint. When they get nice and juicy, they're ready to go. When we clean up, we're going to clean up the mixing wells with either a paper towel or a dish rag, but we're not going to clean up the pigment wells yet. We're going to wait and let them dry. Then we can clean it up like the kitchen floor. Give it a swipe, rinse your brush. Give it a swipe, rinse your brush. If you don't rinse your brush, look what I'm doing. Give it a swipe, give it a swipe. I am putting down the contamination I just cleaned up. So I'm going to rinse my brush and give it as many swipes as I need to have a nice clean surface. There we go. Now, we've got the brushes we talked about in a previous video. We need a mister, dollar store, drugstore. We've got our water container that we talked about. And we have a simple palette with at least 6 mixing wells. I'm sorry, 6 pigment wells and an ample space to mix your color. Let's talk about our work surface a minute. I like to work on a bath towel. I wipe my brush on the towel. It gets messy. I take it home, put it in the Clorox. See, look at that. Put it in the washing machine. It's good to go. I use it to damp my brushes, knock water off, clean my brushes while I'm working. Some people will use a paper towel, and that's fine. Others will use a kitchen sponge. That's fine. Others are going to use a roll of toilet paper. Rinse your brush. That's fine. The water's going to soak on in. Obviously, clean it up, and you're ready to go. You're going to develop your own personal preferences as you grow in your watercolor experience. So take it easy, be patient with yourself. Let's use some simple but good supplies. Your student brushes, a nice simple palette, an easy to clean workspace. And next video, we're going to talk about pigments. Bam. Where are they? Here they come. Do you need a big tube, little tube? Do you need to spend $20 on a tube, $4 on a tube? There's lots and lots of choices and lots of reasons why you would prefer one over the other. So we concluded our Let's Talk About Palette segment. We've talked about what brushes you need. We talked about your workspace. So follow me for the pigment video, and then we will begin to paint. Big, little, what colors, professional, what defines a student grade. There's a lot of information there for you. So watch for Let's Talk About Pigments, and we'll clean up some confusion there. Then join me while we paint our very first painting, The Silly House. I'll see you there.